Welcome back to Ben's Book Club. Today we are diving into the book Making Money Made Simple. This explainer is going to act as your absolute foundational blueprint for wealth, exploring what is without a doubt an Australian classic. You can kind of think of this book as Australia's answer to Rich Dad, Poor Dad. First published by Noel Whittaker way back in 1987, it's this incredibly practical, plain English guide that has completely demystified personal finance for generations of readers. It focuses entirely on actionable, everyday habits rather than burying you in complex financial jargon.
Here is how we're breaking down the agenda today. 1. The blueprint for wealth. 2. The miracle of compounding. 3. Killing the credit card. 4. Shares versus property. And 5. Does it still hold up?
To wrap our heads around the massive impact of this book, we really have to look at its legacy. We're talking over 2 million copies sold worldwide since it first hit the shelves. It stayed on the bestseller list for a record 9 years and was literally named one of the 100 most influential books of the 20th century in Australia. And Whittaker himself, he spent 30 years directing an advisory firm with over $2 billion under management. So we are learning from someone with deep, in-the-trenches practical experience.
The core mindset takeaway of Whittaker's entire philosophy is beautifully simple. I am in charge of my life. Financial freedom doesn't just magically appear from a massive salary, right? It comes from radical personal responsibility. Whittaker argues that most people stay broke not because they have terrible luck, but simply because they lack basic financial knowledge and fail to take consistent action. You absolutely have to put yourself in the driver's seat.
Okay, Section 1. The Blueprint for Wealth. Information is useless without an action plan.
Whittaker stresses that financial paralysis is what stops people dead in their tracks, so you must treat your personal finances exactly like a business. He actually revamped his books over the years because he realized people would read them, feel super motivated, and then change absolutely nothing. You need an action plan. First, write down exactly where you are today, your assets versus your debts. You literally cannot navigate without a starting line. Second, cap your liabilities by spending less than you earn. And third, systematically buy growth assets that do the heavy lifting for you in the background.
Now here is a fascinating behavioral hack he champions to keep you on track: the money buddy. Just like you'd have a gym buddy to spot you and keep you from skipping leg day, a money buddy is essential for keeping you financially disciplined. To actually stick to that rule of spending less than you earn, having an accountability partner, whether it's your spouse, a good friend, or a coworker, absolutely skyrockets your success rate.
Moving right along to Section 2, the miracle of compounding. Time is your biggest ally. When we compare starting to invest at age 24 versus age 40, the exponential growth difference is just staggering. Whittaker visualizes compound interest not as some dry math equation, but as an explosive exponential curve. One reader of the book actually shared this amazing anecdote. They read it back in 1989 and started saving just $150 a week at age 24, starting completely broke. By age 37, they owned their home outright, had shares, superannuation, and financed a business. Time, not income, is your biggest ally.
So, the big takeaway here? Compound interest is the literal engine of wealth. It is a mathematical certainty. Whittaker literally calls it the guaranteed secret of wealth. That rate of return dictates how fast you escape the gravity of debt and how quickly your portfolio takes off. It proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that small, disciplined habits repeated over time will always be chasing quick, high-risk wins.
Let's jump into Section 3. Killing the credit card, the psychological trap of plastic.
This brings us to a very real, kind of wild danger in the modern dating and marriage world, what Whittaker calls sexually transmitted debt. Yeah, you heard that right. This refers to the financial burdens you inherit from a partner due to a lack of transparent, non-judgmental money conversations. Avoiding bad debt is absolutely vital, and you must communicate clearly with your partner before you get dragged down by someone else's undisciplined spending habits.
Going deeper on the whole plastic trap, Whittaker argues our brains simply aren't wired for it. Credit cards abstract the pain of paying. When you hand over fiscal cash, you feel it. When you tap a shiny piece of plastic, you just don't. He also heavily targets the points trap. Is getting 1% back in airline miles really worth it if the psychological urge of the card lures you to spend 15% more on everyday items? No way. For the everyday consumer, Whittaker strongly advocates a strict debit-only rule. If the cash isn't sitting in your account, you simply do not buy the item.
Okay, Section 4, Shares versus Property. Demystifying growth assets.
Reviewers constantly call out
this specific part of the book as a real game changer. Whittaker breaks down the different criteria for equities versus real estate, providing a rock-solid decision-making framework so the everyday investor can weigh up what actually makes sense for their specific lifestyle and goals instead of just relying on flat, generic recommendations.
So when you're building out that strategy, keep in mind that for shares, the focus is on high liquidity, but you have to be prepared to stomach some serious market volatility. For property, you're looking at a tangible asset heavily focused on long-term growth. Whittaker does an incredible job of demystifying complex, often intimidating topics like negative gearing, market fluctuations, and investment taxes. He shows that ordinary folks can absolutely win with either asset class, provided they understand the basics, and, most importantly, avoid panicking and making emotional mistakes when the market takes a dip.
Finally, Section 5. Does it still hold up? The timeless test.
This sparks the absolute biggest debate among readers today. We're living in an era with a massive generational divide regarding housing affordability, right? Plus, we have sticky inflation. A lot of critics push back on the book's optimism, pointing out that it requires a significantly higher multiple of an average salary to buy a first home today than it did 30 years ago. So we really have to critically ask if his rules still apply in our modern gig economy, where financial pressures feel heavier than ever. Well, here's the crucial point. While specific rules definitely change, human behavior, it really doesn't. The book actually underwent a complete revamp in May of 2024 for Special Anniversary Edition, updating all the specific tax, superannuation, and legislative rules for today's world. But the core thesis remains completely untouched, because behavioral psychology is undefeated. The math of compound interest, the psychological danger of abstracting spending through credit, and the absolute necessity of spending less than you earn, those foundations of wealth are completely timeless, no matter what decade you happen to be investing in. I'll leave you with this final thought to kickstart your own action plan. Wealth isn't about just reading a book. It's about what you actually do after you put it down. Are you going to sit down and write out your assets and debts? Are you going to go find a money buddy? What is one small step you'll take this week? Thank you so much for joining me to explore this incredible blueprint. And remember, subscribe so you don't miss an episode.